I'll put it over here. Today's topic is argument structure. And in particular, we're going to talk about linking. So this is something that has come up in the discussions before, where people were talking about agent and patient, etc. So far I've given you, we've gone through grammatical functions. We've gone through grammatical functions and how they're done in LFG. So to recall, what are our grammatical functions? We had subject, right? Object theta, where this is supposed to be semantically restricted in some way. We had oblique theta. Right, so these are our main ones. Okay? And then we had ex-comp and comp. Right? Yeah. Okay. Now, if we have examples like Peter laughed versus Peter fell. In both cases, this will be analyzed. Peter is the single argument, right? In both cases, it'll be analyzed as a what? As a what? What's my argument here? What's Peter? The subject. The subject of the sentence. Was that question too difficult or too easy or what? Too easy. I'm just making sure you're listening. Okay, so it's the subject. Okay, but it turns out, so from the perspective of grammatical relations, from the perspective of grammatical functions, we have a predicate, and this predicate takes a subject. So each of these verbs would have an entry like this. We would have an entry like this. It would say laugh. Hang on. Where's my thing? We would say we have a predicate whose semantic value is laugh, and it takes a subject. Okay, and we would have the same for here. We would say we have a predicate whose semantic value is fall, and it has a subject. But now consider, so it's actually well known, it's been well known since the 80s that these are intransitive verbs are not considered equal. And you can see that the evidence came from Romance, but German shows it as well. So let's look at some German examples. Peter hat gelacht is the equivalent of Peter laughed. Peter has laughed. Peter ist gefallen is the equivalent of Peter fell. Oder hingefallen. Hingefallen is better, but it doesn't matter. Okay. So this is fell. This is laughed. And now notice something. We have a different auxiliary verb here in German. Okay, who knows why this is? Probably most of you or some of you have encountered this before. both intransitive verbs, but they take a different auxiliary. And if you try putting ist here, in German this is bad. If you try putting hat here, it's bad. Peter hat gefallen is a bad sentence. Peter ist gelacht is a bad German sentence. So what's the difference between these verbs? What's going on?
I think that ist combines with motion verbs.
Ist combines with motion verbs, yeah, that is one factor, yeah, but it's not just motion verbs, so gefallen, that's correct. But you also say things like Peter ist gestorben, Peter died, not sure that's a motion verb. Peter hat gestorben, bad again, yeah, let me put it on here. Gestorben. Nice cheery verb on a nice foggy December. So same. Ist is good, hat is not. So motion verbs is one category, but it's a subcategory of what linguists have determined is going on. Volition is one category for up here. Volition agency is ones that are associated with this one. But this category also has verbs in it like vomit or burp. Those are called verbs of involuntary bodily processes. Okay, so they're in there too. Yeah.
The ist verbs are experience verbs.
Experiencer verbs, yeah. That's in there too. Okay, so you guys haven't heard of this famous distinction, but it's true. The experiencer verbs are in here as well. Okay, so what the distinction usually is called is that these are unergative verbs. Unergative verbs. And these are unaccusative verbs. Okay, and I can try to explain. These names are they're not a bit odd, they're extremely odd. And I can try to explain to you why they came to be that way. There's a very nice article on this by Jeff Pullum. He writes really, really well. If you guys haven't seen his book, there's a very great book. If you like linguistics, it's very good. The Great Eskimo Vocabulary Hoax. It's a collection of a series of essays on linguistic questions. If you have a partner who's a linguist, give it to them for Christmas or for their birthday or something. It's a very nice collection of essays, and one of the essays is about this unfortunate naming convention. Many things went wrong in linguistics. Okay, but it turns out that across languages, you actually have these two categories of unergative verbs and unaccusative verbs. These ones tend to be associated with, the way it has been analyzed, is with themes or patient arguments. So, which is why you have these motion verbs, experiencer. So these are things that they're arguments which are undergoing some kind of motion or some kind of experience that sort of fits there. And these unergative verbs are ones which tend to have some kind of agentive argument. And for some reason, verbs of involuntary bodily processes count as being agentive in some sense. I guess because we're actually doing something. I don't know. So this distinction goes back to a very famous study, again by Perlmutter and Postel. Who looked at this stuff in the 1980s. And they looked at many languages, and they found that in all of these, that in many languages, well, in all the languages they saw, and as far as I know this holds for all languages that they are, that you actually get this distinction between types of intransitive verbs, at least unaccusatives versus unergatives. And in many languages this has some kind of reflex. In Italian and in German, you can see it via this auxiliary. In Urdu, you can see it via, I'll ask the Urdu speaker, via case markers. So in Urdu, you can see it via case markers. So these ones get an ergative case marking, and these ones get no case marking in Urdu. Okay. Should I write those down? Those examples? Yes, no? No. Clear enough. So you get these kinds of distinctions. So what does this show us? Why am I showing you this? Because, okay, so let me finish this. Two classes of intransitives. And we have the unaccusatives. And they come up with certain things. They say things like, so motion verbs tend to be in here, but also what is called inchoatives. These are verbs like, I could just give you some examples. Melt, die, grow. Existing and happening. So things like exist, arise, happen. If you know languages other than English or German, you can try translating these and see if they behave differently. I don't know about Hungarian, for example, whether you start getting differences. Or Persian or Urdu. Urdu, I know there's a difference in terms of case marking. Okay, then. And then what they call an affected argument. And they would have examples like burn, dry. And unergatives, like I just said, involuntary bodily process. Vomit, belch, those kinds of things. Manner of speaking. So things like whisper, mumble. What else have we got? Animal sounds, I'm not going to write those down. Things like bark and roar. And willful acts, willful or volitional acts, like laugh, cry. Okay, and I've given you the examples they have for English. So what I said is that all languages seem to make this distinction, but languages differ as to which verb is which. So I think it was Choctaw. In Choctaw, die is not an unaccusative. In Choctaw, you die unergatively. Okay? I guess it's more of an agentive process or something. But so individual verbs will be classified differently in languages. But the general distinction between unaccusatives and unergatives exists in language after language after language, as far as we can tell. Okay, so now why is this relevant? Because it shows that what one needs in linguistic analysis is not just grammatical relations. So, analysis not just at level of GF. Okay, so not just subject-object. That's a good level of analysis for several things, but you actually need some level of arguments, what people have come to call argument structure. Okay, and then what you can do is you can distinguish, you can say, okay, I'll just give you a preview. Unaccusatives, for example, will have a theme argument. TH stands for theme, or you could have a patient argument. PT stands for patient. And this is related, or in LFG terms, linked to a subject argument. It's the only argument there, so it'll be linked to a subject argument. This will be something like fall. Okay, so what you have here is you have the predicate argument structure of a verb is considered to have two parts. One is the thematic part, the argument structure part, and one is the grammatical function part. Let's look at laugh. AG stands for agent, and that would be linked to a subject as well. Okay, so at this level of analysis, we see no difference between these two types of verbs. But at this level of analysis, you see a difference. Yeah? And for some types of analysis you want to be able to explain this. If you try and explain why auxiliary selection in German is different between these two verbs, well, you can state the generalization. It's not the only factor, but mainly in terms of this. Yeah? Are there questions about this?
What does PT stand for again?
Patient. I'll give you a list of thematic roles people usually assume in a minute. Okay. Other questions? So the question was, what does PT stand for? PT stands for patient. Okay, then what do we need? We need to have what LFG does is it has some theory of how this works. Okay, I've just written that by lines, but there's actually theory about how this works. And this has come to be known as linking theory. And that is part of what I'll be doing today. Okay, so I'll launch into that in a little bit. Okay, but first some other background. So what LFG very clearly assumes that this is functional structure, this level here. This is functional structure, F structure. And this part here is argument structure, or a structure. Often referred to as a structure. Okay, and these levels are considered to be separate levels of representation, separate properties, linked by these relations that are part of linking theory. Now, some of you have had syntax in other contexts. How do those theories do it? Do they have two separate representations? If you think back to other courses or other things you've read. Yes, no, maybe? I remember some of you said you had syntax before. Can't remember? So the Chomskyan line of argumentation, or the Chomskyan take has been, there's been something called, this is what used to be the case, something called deep structure, and then something called surface structure. And you went from a deep structure type tree to a surface structure type tree, right? So you had something, you would have something like fall, the verb. Let's try this again. And then you would have an NP here. This would be your verb, fall, and you have this NP here, whatever it is. Okay, and at the deep structure, what this says is that I actually have a theta relationship here, and this is like a theme-patient relationship. Okay, but you don't, in English, you don't say fell Peter, you say Peter fell. So what you assume is that what happens at the surface structure is something like, make sure I get this right. We have fall, and you have this NP, and there's now a trace, and this NP has gone and moved over here. Yeah, so the idea is that in this is like the 80s style Chomskyan take, government binding. You have the relationship of argument structure, you try to do it a deep structure, and then in order to account for surface, the way it actually is on the surface, you have some kind of movement and you put stuff here. So this would be Peter fell. And past tense would be up here, right? Something like that. Okay, so in a sense there's a separation, but in a sense there's not, because it's the same tree, just derived. And I can also now tell you why this thing is called unaccusative, because this is an accusative configuration. And then when it moves up, it's no longer accusative, it's unaccusative. Yeah, and then unergative by analogy. That's why they called it that back then. Okay, so they do it in terms of that structure, but there was actually one more point. There's actually a very famous paper by Chomsky from 1970 called Remarks on Normalization. Which I was told when I was studying, if you haven't read this, you haven't lived. So I went and read it. It's quite good. What he showed in this paper is actually what then LFG took to decide that one didn't want to do things in terms of trees. One really wanted to have a separate level of argument structure. So what he noticed is that you have it's nominalization, so you have things like John presented a medal to Mary. Fine, right? You have a verb, it has 3 arguments, John, subject, object, and oblique. In LFG terms, Chomsky would analyze this differently, but for us, subject, object, oblique. And you can nominalize it, right? So you can get John's, make sure I get it right, presentation of the medal to Mary. Okay, so now what's interesting about this? This was a verb, this is now a noun, but we have all the same arguments. They look slightly different because nouns can't do the same case marking, etc., as verbs do, but you have the same arguments. And what he pointed out is that you would like to have some general way of capturing this. Right? That when you take a verb, you nominalize it, the arguments, since then we know they don't stay quite the same, but there is a relationship between this and this. Okay, that's what he wanted to, that's what he pointed out. With an LFG, Malka Rappaport took this further. You can see 13 years later, so it's really a landmark paper. She took this further and she showed, I won't go through the argument unless you really want me to, but she showed that, that you have to separate structure from argument structure. Separate.
One more question.
Yeah.
Why did he nominalize everything? What was the point in doing this?
Why did he so the question is, why did he nominalize everything? What was the point? The point was he noticed that in English particularly you have a relationship between verbs and their nominalizations. You can nominalize pretty much everything, right? And then he further noticed that nouns usually don't have arguments in that sense, but that when you nominalize something, the arguments that the verb had are found, the same ones with a noun. Okay, so he says there's a general relationship between verbs and nouns that you want to have some kind of generalization for. So what is the generalization that you could make? Well, you could say present is a verb that has an agent, a theme, and some kind of a goal. I'm just making it up. He didn't write it like this, right? But something like that. So what you can say is that this informs this entry, the verb, but it also informs this entry. Okay, so when you make the noun, you have access to the information that it has an agent, a theme, and a goal. Okay? And you don't want to fiddle with this is an object, this is a this, because look, here this John's is a genitive. Right? So it doesn't look the same as this. This is also a genitive. Doesn't look the same as this because a noun can't have nominative accusative arguments. So what he was saying, abstract away from that and let's have the generalization at this level. That was his point. Yeah? Does that make sense? So he was pointing out that something like argument structure exists. And then the question is, how do you actually encode that in your grammar? And the answer in government binding, which was the 80s, was structurally. Okay, so people who were following his theory, he himself, building on his insights, decided that this kind of thing, this basic thing, needs to be encoded as deep structure. And then you do your rest of your tree. Whereas in LFG, followed the findings by Malka Rappaport, who said you really have to separate syntactic structure, from argument structure. So she went through a whole bunch of examples. It's a very complicated, complex paper and complex argumentation. But she said, if you do this, you get yourself into all kinds of trouble. So don't do it. Okay, so separate them out completely. Okay, so what LFG ended up with is not this deep structure, surface structure business, but they ended up with C structure, where you have something like Peter, what did we have? Fell. And we have the F structure. We would have a main predicate, fall subject, and the subject is Peter. Tense is past. And then we have an argument structure as well, where we have something like fall takes a theme or a patient, whichever one you like. Okay, so there's at least 3 things going on. And then you have to have a theory about how these are related. Yeah. And these two are related. This is related to that one by a linking theory. And this is related, these two are related to each other via the phi projection. And I was going to talk about this as well in some more detail. And in fact, so the linking theory, I'll be telling you about it explicitly, but it actually also ends up being a mathematical projection from one to the other. Okay, questions about that? So LFG really has 3 representations, right? 3 sort of basic representations. The argument structure, F structure, C structure. And other theories tend to have 1, and they tend to do it via derivational steps. Yeah.
So linking theory is connecting A structure with the F structure.
Yeah.
What is connecting the C structure with the F structure? Not projection?
The phi projection. Yeah. Let's see, I should probably explain that first. I'll take a vote. Should I explain this one first, or should I keep going with linking theory? Explain it first. Okay. So then we'll keep linking theory on hold. Okay. And then we'll do that projection. I don't like explaining that. I was confused. Okay. So let's do the phi projection. Okay. So, relating C structure to F structure. Okay, and this is actually a function, a mathematical function, which is incredibly well defined. And I'm not going to explain all the mathematical bits of it. However, what this does, it defines a relationship between C and F structure. Well, that seems obvious. Okay, how does it do it in particular? By the way, you can read about this. The discussion in Mary Dalrymple's book is extremely good on this. This is pages 117 through. So you can go look at that again. If I confuse you. Okay, so just sort of conceptually, this is your C structure, and this is just one verb in it, just a piece of C structure. And this is a piece of F structure. Pred, fall, subject. And what do we have? We have tense past. Okay, so this is a piece of F structure. And what we have, the phi relation, what it does, it says how this piece of the C structure relates to that piece of the F structure and how this piece of the C structure relates to that piece. Okay, this is what the phi one does. It tells you how this node relates to which pieces of that F structure and how this node relates to that F structure. Okay, so how does this do it exactly? Well, the sort of glue in between is the functional annotations. Remember we had those before? And then there is a way of solving these functional annotations. So what the set of functional annotations give you is a set of F descriptions, they're called. And these need to be solved. Well-formed F structure. Okay, so some vocabulary. What you have is this means current C structure node. This means mother C structure node. So that's the immediately dominating C structure node, yeah. And then we have this function. C structure to F structure function. Okay, now how do we do? We have some abbreviations. The function of this, make sure I write it right, is usually abbreviated as down. the function applied to the mother node is usually abbreviated as up. So if we have something like up equals down, what this means is the information associated with this node is the same as the information associated with that node. This should start sounding familiar. We've done this bit before, right? Okay. So these functional annotations are the glue that are telling you how to relate this to that. They're giving you F structure information. This phi function tells you how to relate the information associated with these things with the F structure. Okay, and before that gets any more complicated, I'm going to take you through an example. Okay, so give you a chance. No, I won't give you a chance to ask questions. Okay, so I'm going to take the example from Mary's book. We have an IP that has an NP here, and that just goes to an N, and that'll be Peter. And we have an I bar, and we don't have any I. We just go directly to VP. And in the VP, we also just go directly to a verb, which is fell. Okay, now we're going to annotate this like we had before. This is the subject of the whole thing, right? Okay. This information will just pass along whatever it has, and all these are quite boring as well. They will just pass along whatever it has. Actually, why don't we get ambitious and add an object? Let's see if this will probably get me into trouble, but let's try it. So then we can't have fall. We need to have. What did he do? He ate something. Ate cake. Okay, this NP is the object. Okay, we've got everybody annotated now. Okay, so that's what we've got. We've got a nicely decorated F structure tree. So now let's figure out how to solve this into an F structure. So what do we have? The way we do it is actually like this. We go through and we, oh yeah, we need some lexical entries as well. Let's get those. So this would be upspread is equal to Peter. This would be upspread. You tell me, what's it? Upspread is equal to what? What should I put in there? Eat subject object. Getting a bit crowded here. And we'll say something like ups tense is past. And for cake, it'll be upspread is equal to cake. Okay, so now what do we do? The first thing we do is we label all these nodes randomly. Well, not randomly, it doesn't matter. So we'll call this one 1, we'll call this one 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Forget one? No. Okay, I could call them A, B, C, D, E, whatever. I just need a name for them. Just so that I know which node is doing what. And now I start translating. Remember, this is the phi function that's talking about the mother. This is a phi function that's talking about this one. What this one says is, well, the information associated with this node, node number 1, is Peter. So let's write that as an equation. So this will be f, and I'll call it f just for the function there. F pred, f1's pred is equal to Peter. Okay. Now let's translate this thing. Let's figure out what this says. This one says that node's information is in my node. So that one says f2 is equal to f1. Okay, and we do the same for the rest. What do we have here? This would be f6 pred is equal to eat subject object. And how do I translate this? The tense information? Which node is this pointing to? Wait, yeah.
I'm not sure, F3?
This one is over here and it's pointing to this one, right? 6. Why F3? F3 is all the way up there.
Because, of the inflectional information, tense information. I thought it could be.
I know, you have to think very, very logically, mathematically here. We're down here, we point up. Okay, this is the node we're pointing to. Okay, the information associated with that is past. What about this one? How do we interpret those? Yeah. Yep. F5 is equal to F6. Doesn't matter, but I'll write it that way. What's here? F4 is equal to F5. And then you get your F3 is equal to F4. Now what do we have left? We have this one left. We have this left. Okay, you tell me what this one is now again. How do I interpret that? F8, I hear a whisper. F8's pred is equal to cake. This thing, F7 is equal to F8. And one more left. This one. This one is pointing to what? 5. F5's object is equal to F7. Okay, and we already did that one. So this is my collection of F descriptions. Did I forget that? Okay. So I forgot about the subject, it seems. So let's do that. Oh yeah, up there. What do I write there? Yeah.
F3 subject equals F2.
F3 subject equals F2.
Is it not F2 subject equals F3?
No, she's right. This is showing up, this is pointing up here, mother node. It's node number 3, we called it, is this one. Okay, now I can try to solve these equations. So,
The question was we have put F5 twice. We have put F5 equal F6 and F5 object equal F7. Mustn't F5 equal F6 not be specified further on? Let's say F5 brackets with a verb is equal to 6.
no. So the question is whether, so we've got F5 twice. We've got F5 equals F6 and F5's object is F7, whether there needs further specification. It shouldn't. We should be able to solve these things now. So let's see what we can do. Okay, let's start drawing an F structure. Okay, so let's start drawing an F structure. I'm trying to figure out where. I think I'll have to do it here. Okay, I'm going to draw an F structure and label it F3. Okay, now we can go through these things. Let's just start at the beginning. F3 subject is equal to F2. So we have a subject in here, which has an F structure called F2. Okay, that's what this one does. We'll skip that one for a moment because I don't know what to do with it. Let's see, anything that says anything about F3 or F2. F2 is equal to F1. So we know that this F structure is also F1. So this one's done. Let's see, anything with F3, F1, F2. Here's one. F3 is equal to F4. So this same F structure we've called F3 and F4. Okay, now we've done that one. F4 in turn is equal to F5. F5 in turn is equal to F6. Okay, now we can go back through and see if any of those others make sense to us. F6, the F structure F6 has the information that its tense value, that its tense attribute has the value past. So we can write that in here. Here's F6, tense past. Okay, now I've done that. F6 also has information associated with it that it has a pred value, a pred attribute, whose value is eat subject object. So we can write that up here. Doesn't matter where we write it. I write it up here by convention. Okay, so now we've done that one. How about this one now? Now you guys do this one. Yeah. Right, so it has to go into the F1 structure. It says the F structure called F1 has an attribute pred whose value is Peter. F1 is here, so we write it in here, and it's Peter. Okay, did that one too. How about F8? I don't see any F8 yet, so skip it. F7, F8, we don't have in there as yet. Let's try this one, F5, object F7. Do we have information about that? Oh, we haven't done this one yet, right? So, hang on.
F5 we have. F5 is in the first line.
In here, F5, that's right. So F5 is this one. So F5's object is equal to F7. So we can put that in here too. So F5 is this one, this F structure. It has an object. And it has some F structure associated with it. That will label F5. No, which one? F7, right? So then we've done this one. F7 is also known as F8. Done this one. This one we haven't done. F8 has associated with the information that it has a predicate attribute whose value is cake. Done that one. We done them all now? Yeah. Okay, so now we have this F structure. Predicate, eat, subject, object. Subject is Peter, object is cake, tense past. And we got that from the C structure via the phi relationship, via the phi function, which told us how to interpret the information, the function annotation. Okay? You only ever have to go through this once, I think. Yeah?
May I link this to the homework? Like, how much specification do you need in the homework? Would you ask specifically for the linking
No.
aspect of this if you wanted us to do it that way?
Okay, so the question is how specific does your answer have to be on the homework? I asked you to draw C structure and F structure analyses. No, you don't have to do this.
Okay.
You just give me the C structure tree and the F structure. And you give me the annotations though on the C structure tree, right? The way they're here with up and down arrows. Okay? That needs to be done. So the C structure tree needs to have functional annotations on it with up and down arrows. And then the phi function takes care of that, right? So then you should be able to check that it in fact makes the right F structure, but I don't need all the details. Yeah. Other questions?
This kind of presupposes that the declarations on the tree are already in place, right?
Yes.
So how do you get from sort of their C structure tree to the decorated C structure tree? And is there some kind of proper description of that process as well?
Okay, so the question is, how do we get the functional annotations on a C structure tree? Okay, and if there's some kind of general algorithm or whatever. There is not. Generally, when you write an LFG grammar, generally you write rules that'll say something like NP goes to determiner noun phrase, and then you yourself have to think, okay, so this is my C structure backbone. What is my functional information that I want associated with it? And you put that in there. Okay, maybe the VP would have been a better example. So if you're doing English, you realize, oh, this thing is always going to be the object. So then you put that there as part of your linguistic analysis. If you're doing Urdu or Walbury, you need a different rule. Okay, but that's part of your linguistic analysis. And you have to write each one of those. Other questions before I erase it? Because now we'll do as much of linking theory as we can. So that was C structure to F structure. Now we'll do F structure to A structure. But you can see now why this is a nice mathematically calculable thing and computers like it. You go through it, figure out all your equations, see if they make sense, see if they can be solved, and if not, you come back and say, no, no. Okay. Now, A structure to F structure, which is known as linking. Okay, now, unlike the phi projection that I just showed you, which is mathematically extremely well defined, it's been around since in LFG since the very, very beginnings. It's just there. You just write your annotations. The mathematical formalism will worry about it. Linking theory is not as well defined. Okay, there is sort of a standard version of linking theory. And this goes by the name of lexical mapping theory. Lexical mapping theory, or LMT. And this is what I'll be teaching you. But there are many, many versions of linking theory. I have my own version. Yeah. I have some people following me, but not everybody. Other people have made their own versions. People are tinkering with this lexical mapping theory in many, many different ways. So it doesn't have the same status as the phi function in a sense. We know that we can define a relation between A structure and F structure. It's possible. What linguists have not agreed on is what that relationship should be. Okay, so there is still room for improvement, room for different theories. What Mary Dalrymple tells you in her book is the standard theory, although she has a slight twist of her own. So for this case, I'm going to teach you the version that's in Lexical-Functional Syntax in Joan Bresnan's book. That's a pretty clear version. And if you want to have a history of linking and why and wherefores, I've written all about it in my own book, Theories of Case. There's a chapter in there on linking. So if this is one of those things that you think would interest you for your project, for your presentation, there's lots to be said in this area because it hasn't been settled yet. Then those are places you can start looking. Okay, so what do we have in linking theory? We have some ingredients I already told you. Okay, so we assume that argument structure is separate. We assume that we have thematic roles. These are often abbreviated in the literature as theta roles. It's a Greek symbol. And thematic roles are problematic in that people keep trying to get rid of them because you're never sure what they exactly mean. I'll tell you about that in a second. But nobody's ever gotten rid of them, managed to get rid of them completely. What one usually assumes along with thematic roles is a thematic hierarchy. And I'll talk about this first. The thematic hierarchy that LFG assumes, various different theories assume different ones, is agent is higher than beneficiary, is higher than experiencer, goal, those are taken to be the same thing often, is higher than instrument, is higher than patient or theme, is higher than locative. Okay, so this hierarchy is important because it sort of guides you. It guides you on which ones are more likely to be subjects. Things to the left are more likely to be subjects than things on the right. Okay, so cross-linguistically, if you look, agents and experiencers are likely to be subjects. Locatives, patients, themes are less likely to be subjects, unless they're the only argument around, like we saw with the unaccusatives. Okay? But of course, we have experience as subjects in languages, but we also have these as objects. So they could be either. So this is just a way of guiding, of thinking which ones are more likely to be subjects. There is, different theories have different versions of this hierarchy. The one, LFG has this version because of evidence from idioms. So when you form idioms, things like put somebody to shame, you tend to form idioms starting here and moving up. So put somebody to shame is a locative in a way. Give somebody a hand, give somebody something. Yeah. Let the cat out of the bag, those two things again. But you don't get idioms that involve agents very much. Okay, so that's sort of one idea. Also, if you look at word order, default word order across languages, it tends to be in this order. Yeah, so if you look at German, somebody gave the kid a cake. That's the default word order for this. Okay, so you have lots and lots of evidence where this thematic hierarchy seems to be correct. And that's what we work with. Okay, so we have that. Just as an aside, people don't like these thematic roles. They're very practical. I can tell you what an agent is. You say, okay, cool, that's an agent. But if we have examples like, not a good one, the car hit the tree. This is an example from Charles Fillmore, Chuck Fillmore, who was one of the inventors of these kinds of thematic roles back in the 60s. So, but this thing has a problem. So in a way, the car hit the tree. It's an agent because it did the hitting. But at the end, it's completely trashed and needs to be thrown away. Totalschaden, as they say here. And then it's a patient, right? Because something happened to it. Or an undergoer, it's also known. So it's, on the other hand, the tree is probably also a patient, but you don't know, was it a big tree? Did it get hit? Did it fall over? Was it a huge tree and nothing happened? Only some bark fell off. So there's a lot of problems with this kind of definition. There's a very famous article by David Doughty from 1990. It's referred to in my book, where he talks about all the problems with these definitions from a semantic point of view. So all of us know these are problematic. All of us keep using them because nobody's come up with a really good alternative. They seem to be useful to some degree. Okay, now what does Joan do, or what does standard lexical mapping theory do? So we have our thematic roles. We need to understand how these thematic roles hook up to these things. Okay, so, and there's two ways of, two sides to this coin. One is you have two features. This is the main part. And this is also where people keep tinkering with, like one of the places where people keep tinkering with lexical mapping theory. So you have two binary features. One is plus and minus object. And the other one is plus and minus restricted. Okay, and they're usually abbreviated as plus and minus O and plus and minus R. Plus and minus object is self-explanatory. Either you're an object type thing or you're not. And they came up with this because the idea was that there are certain grammatical functions like subject and oblique, which are not at all object-like, and then there's a whole bunch which are object-like, so you wanted to make a cut there. And this restricted refers to semantically restricted. Now, formal semanticists will not agree with this. The idea here is that what it boils down to is that there's a specific thematic role associated with this. So if you have datives, they tend to have goals. They tend to be goals. Okay, so that's what the idea is there. So it's not a formal semantic type of restriction, but that you have a special type of restriction on you. So how does this play out? If you remember, we had our grammatical functions. We can try to do this together. Well, let's do it the way Joan has it. It's quite nice. We have minus R plus R minus O plus O. So if we do a table like this, and we try to understand our grammatical functions in terms of this binary feature system, then how would it work out? What is the subject, minus or plus O? Minus O. So it's up here for sure. Minus restricted or plus restricted. This is a bit more difficult to answer just like that, but if you look at how subjects work across languages, they can be agents, they can be experiencers, they can be locatives even. So there seems to be no restriction. Okay, how about object? Definitely an object. So either one of these. No restriction, yeah, because objects can, just the normal object, can also end up being any one of these. Not any one, but it can do a whole range of these things. And then what do we have left? If you recall. Oblique theta. Oblique theta, is it an object or not? Oblique is an object. Not by definition, it's not an object. No, it's an oblique. And it has this little theta on it, so the idea is that it's associated with a specific thematic role. And then here we have an object theta. Okay? So this gets us pretty far, in fact. I mean, I personally find linking theory or lexical mapping theory very impressive because it gets you very, very far with just these two features. And you can do quite a lot with it. So let's see what you can do with it. Okay, we need a few more things. We need a classification. And these are just the basic rules. Then for more types of things, you need other rules. But you say patient-like roles. So this is doing the grammatical function stuff. But patient-like roles, they should get a minus O. Is that right? No, that makes no sense. Minus R. Because patient-like roles tend to be unrestricted objects a lot of the time. And secondary patient-like roles, they're called. This is a very vague definition. And again, this is part of where you can tinker a lot, because what does it mean to be a patient-like role? They get a +O. The idea is these are things like benefactives or indirect objects. I gave a cake to the child, not to the child. In German, the dative dem Kind. That would be that. And then others get -O. Okay? So they figured out these with some tinkering. There was some tinkering involved. A lot of this theory was figured out on the basis of Bantu languages. There was a big Bantu project at Stanford in the 80s. So a lot of these very intricate things were developed for Bantu languages, but then also Romance languages, and I did a bunch of work on Urdu. And since then there's been work on Polish, etc. So, but first Bantu. Okay, now let's see how it plays out. Let's try a normal transitive sentence, something like pound. That's the example we won't take pound, we'll take kick. Nice violent verb. They're the best because then you have clear agents and patients. So kick has two arguments, right? An agent and a patient. So what are the... So first we do this. So what do? We have agent, patient, what do? You tell me. We say an agent is a what? A minus? Oh. And a patient is a minus? R. Patient is a minus R. Okay, good. Okay, now we look at that. So these are called intrinsic classifications in a sense. So now we look at this. This means that this one could be either a subject or an oblique. And this one could either be a what? A subject or a what? Object. Okay, so far there's two possibilities. Now now what do? So now we need some more mapping principles. Principles. And this says highest theta is mapped onto subj. Yep.
When you do the intrinsic minus O minus R with the agent and patient, why can't you say at the beginning agent is minus O minus R?
Because we don't have, because right at the beginning the first thing we do is this.
Okay, so that's the intrinsic.
So this is a intrinsic classification of only classification of thematic roles. Okay, just as we had a classification of grammatical functions over here via these binary features, we have a classification of thematic roles over here. Okay, so these binary features is where thematic roles and grammatical functions meet. That's how they're related to one another, and then we have to understand how. But so the thematic roles are classified like this. the grammatical functions are classified like this. And then we need some more mapping principles. And these are also very few. The highest thematic role with -o is mapped onto a subject when initial in a structure. Else, what do you do? Else, this one is mapped onto subject. And then, okay, I won't do the other bit. Okay, so this takes care of this, right? So what do we do? So we have these mapping principles. So what's the consequence for our decisions here? What do we have to do with this one? The highest thematic role is mapped with -o is mapped onto subject. Okay, so we know that this one's mapped onto the subject. Here we still have two choices. We can't use this choice anymore. This choice goes away. Why? Yeah?
Because we only can have one subject.
Because we can only have one subject. So this choice is dead for us. So that leaves this choice. Okay? Yeah?
It says the highest thematic role is mapped onto the subject when initial in the
Yeah.
structure. How can the highest thematic role not be initial?
That can happen when you have locatives, for example. They also get -o. So there's various configurations. So this is a catch-all.
When you say the highest, then this agent beneficiary, that's what you mean.
It means that one, right? It means that. So when I mean highest, what do I mean? I mean that thematic hierarchy. And it's according to that thematic hierarchy that arguments are arranged at the argument structure, okay?
Okay, and then the locatives
Yeah.
are at the end.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now let's see what we can do. Now let's consider the passive that we also had, okay? What does the passive do? The passive takes the highest theta role and maps it to 0. That's how Joan Bresnan defines it in her book. You can fight about that as well, but it'll work for us right now. So what do? We have this. If we want to form the passive of kick, what do? We say kick. We have agent, patient. This one gets 0. It's gone for linking purposes right now. And this one is still -r. Now we could call this -o as well, it doesn't matter. So now what do? Now the agent is no longer available for mapping under this analysis of the passive. So then what happens? Well, we only have one left. It's the highest one. Well, this one doesn't work. But if that doesn't work, then this is mapped onto subject. So then we'll call this the subject. And that is how the passive works. Okay. So I have a bunch more examples to show you, but it's now 1:45 or almost 1:45. So I'll stop here, I think, And then we'll continue on next time with the rest of the examples, and then you can refresh your memory about linking and see if we'll do some more complex examples together then, including from Chichewa, which is a Bantu language. Okay, see you next time.